a podcast featuring ordinary men of extraordinary faith. This is Manna.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Manna, a podcast featuring ordinary men of extraordinary faith. I'm your host, Jeff Peterson. Now, none of the guys that you're going to meet here on this podcast would consider themselves to be extraordinary, but it's their humble, holy way of living, which is exactly what makes them extra to me, and I'm excited for you to meet them. Now, we've all heard of the term, or we've used the term, Renaissance man, I'll bet, to describe someone who's got a wide range of interests. But did you know where that term came from? It is named, and I just wikied this, guys, it's named after the Renaissance period of history that produced talented and clever guys like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, who kind of embodied that era, and then that's where the name came from. But I'm going to tell you, today's guest is a Renaissance man of action. Throughout the course of his adult life, and probably his childhood, as we'll find out here today, he has employed his abundance of God's gifts to full effect, from corporate America to rural America, all around the world, as an organizational and individual change agent, an entrepreneur, a thought leader, a speaker, I think a singer, a community activist, a preacher, a trusted advisor to both corporate and community organizations. He goes through life with a generous heart and a razor-sharp mind, exacting equal parts IQ and EQ to transform organizations, communities, and people. He is a bit of a Swiss Army knife of betterment, if you will. Whatever the field, whatever the need, whoever you are, our guest is either that guy or he knows the guy who can help. Most importantly, though, as he would say, he's a father, he's a grandfather, he's a son, a child of God, and a brother in Christ who always tells it like it is. Always, always, always. So, can I get an alleluia for today's Man of Man, Mr. Reynolds-Anthony Harris? Reynolds-Anthony, welcome to Manna.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's great to be here.
Well, it just is so wonderful that you're here. And I kept it out of the intro, but for all of you, the Manna listeners, they need to know that for me personally, you have been one of those guys in my life that, has come in kind of episodically, throughout the years to either kind of course correct or just kind of point me in a direction that I need to be pointed in. And like I did mention in the intro, you do it in a way that's like, okay, here's what you're going to do now, okay? Just like, this is how it's going to go, and just trust me, this is, and it is, and you've always been right. So, and so that's kind of how I want to start. I mean, we'll get back to your child and talk about all that kind of stuff. But you do have this great gift, and I see it with other people as well, of just being this very trusted advisor to people, where you just, you've got their best interests in mind, and you point them on a path, and they're like, okay, well, if that's what Reynolds-Anthony says, that's what I'm going to do. How long has that always been part of you? Or when did you get this sense that you had this gift of connecting and sort of advising?
Well, I would say that my grandmother told me that I had special gifts. Mm-hmm. I think I was 6 years old. I was organizing something in first grade. I don't remember the details, but she says, you're really special. You've been gifted, and you need to use those gifts. I don't know what they all are, but you got a lot of them. And so over the course of my growing up and, on to college and other things, I sometimes resisted that because I sort of wanted to settle into one path, and that's just not what God put me here for.
Right.
Some people say, you could have stayed at Pillsbury or you could have stayed at this corporation, and they were really just parts of the journey, and that journey continues today. Sort of this what I call the last great 20 to 30 years of your life, where you get to say, I don't want to do that. I want to do that. So yeah, I've sort of known, and recently have really, really come to realize that gift and how precious it is.
Yeah, you mentioned how it's been this. You haven't been. It's not something that's been a static thing. It's always been moving, and I actually had this queued up. It's like you're walking right into the next question, because I actually had this. I was doing some reading. I'm reading some St. Augustine stuff right now, which is really amazing. That was written so long ago and it's still so relevant. And he writes that our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. And you are, in the best way, you are a restless person. You know,
Yes.
you're constantly
Yes.
kind of going. And not to be too much of a softball question here, quoting St. Augustine, but what fuels that? Is it faith? Is it role models? Is it what drives that restlessness?
Well, I think God blessed me with an incredible intellect and a big heart. I have both of those. Not that intellect is different from the heart, but those are sort of interconnected. I wrestle with the situations in the world. Things trouble me, and I want to do something about it, and I have. And as the young people say, I have the receipts. And those receipts, and I look back on them, it's like, the Jesuits do this sort of review of your life or consciousness, your contents, review of content. And you look at those receipts and say, yeah, I did that. I had to do it because there was a need there. So yeah, I would say that this is driven by my faith, and I've been blessed with an intellect that is a blessing. I didn't make it; it just is who I am. The range of interests, commitment to my family, and I would say, lastly, the grounding of faith from my father and mother, and my grandmother, particularly Mary Ruth Reynolds, who I'll just acknowledge because she's a saint of a woman, an amazing person. It just freed me to accept myself with the gifts I've been given, and not allow people to box me in or to interpret me through some diffusion of understanding. It's just who I am, and I've come to accept myself and love myself for that.
Yeah. So, the focus on Manna here is about men of faith, the influence, positive influence that guys can have on each other. When you dial back to growing up, you talked about your grandma and your parents. Who are some guys along the way that particularly stand out as role models for you?
Well, I would say my father. My father grew up in Atmore, Alabama. His mother died when he was 18 months old. She died from pneumonia because she couldn't get services at a hospital. So that influenced his life deeply. He ran away or moved away at first at 16, and the Army returned him when they found out he wasn't 18, and he came back, and then he had quite a career. Couple points. On D-Day, you notice in the pictures, the servicemen are all white when you see them coming to the beaches of Normandy. Black soldiers were dropped behind enemy lines. My father was one of those people. And so the gracious passage through that war deeply influenced him. And then there were neighbors, my uncles. I come from a family of men that chose to deal with the challenges of being black men by taking care of their families, having multiple jobs, not accepting the circumstances, but rather working with the circumstances. So my late father did a lot of things. He was in the Army for 20 years. He then worked for another 20 years at the U.S. Post Office, so he ended up with 2 pensions at the end of his life. He also was a gardener. That's where I get my love for agriculture and gardening and farming, because farm in Alabama. I would say my pastor during my middle school time what really influenced me. I was a Lutheran at that point in my life, later converted to Catholicism, but Pastor Hobbick, Zion Lutheran Church in Toledo, Ohio, we'll just send out praises to them. Pastor Hobbick realized that I did have an intellect, so We lived in Germany until I was, I think, kindergarten, first grade time frame, but because my father was stationed there. And so Pastor Habeck helped me reconnect with my German because I could speak German pretty well. And so here I am, I'm a teenager, and he is pushing me and teaching me Hebrew because I would just go over to the church and hang out. Mm-hmm. And he actually helped me think through an idea I had. And I created the first youth group at Zion Lutheran Church in Toledo. And it was, multiracial church. And this is, this is the 60s. Yeah. And he really influenced me on the study of text and context from a biblical standpoint. So we were talking earlier before we got on this morning about text and context. And at that point, that's when I really wondered if I had a calling to ministry. And I sort of explored that for several years along with some other interests because I love science, I love literature. And I felt that the ministry would box me in. So I took what I learned and have used that in my life every day. But yes, Pastor Habeck. And then I'll tell you one more man. His name was Mr. Roundtree. And Mr. Roundtree was a neighbor. And Mr. Roundtree had this electric lawnmower. And I'm 13 years old. And I have a lawnmower because I have a lawn business. I was an entrepreneur at like 8, 9. And I remember one day I was cutting someone's grass. I was on my way home, and I saw this man in his yard, and he had this electric lawnmower. I thought it was so cool. It's high technology. And so my personality as a kid is I went up to him and said, "Sir, my name is Reynolds-Anthony Harris. Mm-hmm. I'm a neighbor. Can I use your mower? I love your mower." And from that day until 1986, when God called him home, he was like a second father. I worked for him in his janitorial cleaning business. And what you should know, Jeff, people often say I'm a pretty good negotiator. Mm-hmm. Well, I learned negotiation from Mr. Roundtree. So when he would negotiate his contract for cleaning a building, he would say, "Boy, come with me. Now keep your mouth shut and just listen. Watch this." And here you have this black man in the mid-60s with these executives in Toledo negotiating the price for cleaning their building. Yeah. And then he would say, "Your job is to clean these offices because one day," I just want you to think about, one day you'll be in one of those offices. Yeah. And one of the big blessings was, the opportunity to do what the Chinese call is set an imprint with the child. The imprint for me is that I'm cleaning and dusting, but one day I'm going to be sitting in that desk. Mm-hmm. And God gave me, I was able to take the blessing, and at the point of time when I had my first sort of executive role, and I actually had an office in Boston with digital equipment, I invited Mr. Roundtree and his wife to come to Boston.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I said, "I have a big surprise for you." And they didn't know. They came to this building, and my assistant came and got them. And I just came into the office and, had art and nice things. And I said, "Well, you did tell me one day I could have a cushion." He said, "A cushioned office." I know what a cushioned office was. I said, but at the time, when I got to it, I said, "Oh, you should know I have a cushioned office." And both of them were just crying. Oh, it was just great. And they, cool. They watched me graduate from college. Yeah. They were there. They got to meet Alex Haley. I will say one of the biggest things in my life was the opportunity to invite Alex Haley. Before Roots Roots was just in Reader's Digest. And based on that reading, we invited him to be our commencement speaker. Wow. At Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, the senior class president, which is I was senior class president, and the president of the university sort of negotiated who the commencement speaker would be, and we invited them together. So the president and the president class. And I should say for fun that our list was Jane Fonda was our first choice. And I think it was, we didn't get to Alex Haley until we had run out of the first 3 people, which he didn't like. Well, Jane Fonda was not going to happen, but it was, it was the 1970, 71, and 1975, and he said, what do you think about this guy in this Reader's Digest? Read this. Yeah. And so I read Alex Haley. Obviously, he had written, Malcolm X piece, and it was so moving. And so to have Mr. Roundtree, who grew up in Mississippi, who made his way, had his own business in Toledo, did well, to be able to introduce my mentor to Alex Haley on the day of my graduation was one of those moments in your life.
Divine, for sure. Yeah.
And so I learned a lot about being a man from him. Obviously your dad, but when you have other men in your life that, I learned the basis of good management, how to read people, how to cut to the chase. So if someone's not working out, they're not working out. I remember high school. I'd work a couple of nights, and then, he sometimes would call me and say, "Are you done with your homework?" Because somebody didn't show up. And I said, "Yeah, my homework's done." He says, "I'm coming to get you." And we would talk, and he said, "This is what happens in companies. You have people that don't show up, and you don't need to spend any time with it. Don't mess around."
Yep.
And that's my philosophy today, too.
Oh, fantastic. I love that. I love the story, the influence, and how it really does, those early influences shape us.
And he was a man of faith, he and his wife, and so, but they were Baptists. So here I am, I have this sort of Lutheran thing going on in my family and my child, and then I got good Mississippi Baptist training too. Yeah. So I thank God for Mr. Roundtree and Mrs. Roundtree.
Yeah. Well, God, and you just led your life, and I think that's why people are continually attracted to you, is you've led a life where you absorb everything. You take everything in, and then it's almost like you bank everything, so that then when you're meeting all these different people, all these different organizations all around the world, you're able to draw on. It's like you've got this Rolodex of ideas and connections and experiences that and it's because you've lived a life of just constant intake. You're taking everything in, so then you can kind of come back out. I think that's just.
I would say, thank you for that, but I would say that God is always with me. I've never not felt the presence of God when I wake up in the morning, when I go to bed at night, even as a young child, and as even in the craziness of being an adolescent and going to college, I just always felt God's presence in some way, guiding me or nudging me, but I also came to know and appreciate the God in others, and I've done enough work with my spirituality, which is one of the areas of study, but also of my experience of being in the world and being present in the world. And one pilgrimage I did, which was the El Camino de Compostela, the Way of St. James. For those who don't know, you do a pilgrimage across northern Spain to the shrine of St. James, the brother Jesus. But one of the things that someone told me to do was that imagine on your way on this pilgrimage, from the time you get on the plane in Minneapolis to fly to Paris, that every human being that you encounter has a message from God for you.
Wow.
And I took that to heart, and I'm about to do a deep retreat here in a couple weeks, and I'm going to review my journals from the first trip and the second trip, because I made notations about what I thought those messages were, and particularly my interaction with Islam, which was interesting, because it was a Christian pilgrimage, but on the way I encountered Islam, and I have a deeper sensitivity and understanding of that. And as you know, the Moors ruled Spain for over 800 years, and so it was helpful for me to understand and learn that piece as well.
Oh, amazing. Oh my gosh, we could talk all day, and I've said that before with guests, but I literally mean that we can't talk all day here. because I just looked down and I think we're running out of tape.
Oh my!
So we are.
Oh dear!
So we're gonna do a little. We're gonna. So we have the last segment, and there's so much more I want to talk to you about with all the work you've done with social justice and everything. But we're gonna cut to the fun segment of the show here, where we ask the same 3 questions of every guest.
Oh.
Now, usually this isn't done in a speed round, but we've got about 5 minutes left.
Great.
So it'll be a little bit more brisk than others. So, but you'll love these questions. So the first question in our fun segment is, if Jesus knocked on your door tomorrow morning and just wanted to hang out for the day, okay? You got a whole day, no agenda other than whatever you want to do with Jesus. What are you going to do with Jesus?
Oh, my first response was, let's do this. And the second response was, so where do we start? I care deeply about children in the state of Minnesota, but the world, I would say. But since Jesus is knocking my door in Minneapolis, I'd say, let me take you to show you where we're struggling. And we're struggling around hunger and food security. And then I would want Jesus to see the joy that our children are able to still live in joy, given some of our challenges. So, yeah, I'd say let's do this. And I want to show you the lakes. I want to show you northern Minnesota. I want to show you the beauty of the Father's creation that's in this state. And I want you to bless the soil, because the soil in our state we have some contamination issues, but we're going to work that out, fix it. So, yeah.
Good. I love it. All right, fun segment question number 2. If you could go to church with any other guy, living or dead, famous or not, you can know him or not, doesn't matter, but you're going to church, and it's got to be with another guy. Who are you going to go to church with?
Wow. Barack Obama. And because I was so curious about his spiritual journey and how and where he sort of landed. And as a biracial man, since I have biracial children and grandchildren, I would want to really be present with him around what does it mean to be a man of faith. But yeah, Barack Obama would be my choice. Awesome.
All right, fun segment question number 3. And you don't have to totally rush it. It looks like we got about 4 minutes left to tape here. So, and this is good. But this one will be a challenge because you've again lived and led a life of doing this, I think, your whole life, which is giving counsel. And so this last question is, if you could give one piece of advice to a younger man about living a confident life of faith, what would that one piece of advice be?
Pray a lot. And what I mean by that is not necessarily in the you could be traditional prayer, obviously, but pray with your whole body. Spend time in nature. Take time to seclude yourself, because you have to quiet down often in that work of prayer, which is, I say, is a kinesthetic action as well. Walking prayer. Sitting prayer, silent prayer, but that would be my advice. Pray a lot and listen.
Love it. Reynolds-Anthony Harris, thank you so much for being here. And even though you're here on season 5, I think we'll have to get you back for season 6 to keep going.
I would love this, and I really like what you're doing, so thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Manna. If you have any questions or recommendations for future guests, send them to mannapodcast@gmail.com.